glad you're with us today because I bet you there's a lot of boys and girls out there that have looked at a comic book. Well, if you've looked at some X-Men comic books, I bet you may have seen some artwork by comic book artist John Byrne. And tell us, how did you first get involved in comic drawing?
Well, I've read comic books since I was just a little kid. I grew up in England, first saw comics there, moved to Canada, saw more comics. And then one day, I guess I was about 21 years old or so, I was in college, and I suddenly thought, people do this for a living.
Hello, Internet. It's time for another Wednesday serial. This is a tag video brought to you by the Howler Mouse. I, however, was tagged by Ghost Critic for the John Byrne video. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about comics that stuck out for me from his career. And I kind of wanted to go over 4 chunks, though 2 are very, very closely related. And so let's just dig in. First up, what I wanted to mention actually while looking in for this video was I found Byrne did a free webcomic you can go check out. It only lasted about 23 pages, but it's like a really light take on kind of a Rachel Rising sort of thing, totally predating it, obviously. And it's these 3 monster ladies just kind of out, kind of solving crimes, just kind of out on the town. It kind of wanders a bit, but it's also kind of fun. It definitely has a sort of goofiness that I feel is in much of what Byrne writes, which is okay. He clearly is geared towards kind of a more younger audience, which makes sense for when his massive body of work was mostly done. And it's just something kind of really cool and kooky, a black and white comic you can go check out. I'm going to put the link in the doobly-doo. And, yeah, some free comics by noted artists that you guys would want to check it out. The next chunk is a bit from his Superman run. And whereas I do remember him relaunching The Man of Steel and reading that when I was in college. I don't actually own a copy of that, but it stuck with me. I thought that was really powerful. But I kind of wanted to dig in a little more to some of his general Superman run. And when he was on Action Comics, there are 2 issues in particular, 592 and 593, that are very bizarre. Big Barda runs into a character called Sleaze. Superman tries to help, and not so much. It kind of ends up that Superman and Big Barda almost perform a sex tape together when under, I guess, what you'd call hypnosis, until Big Barda's husband comes in and saves the day, thank goodness, and we don't want to think about that again. But it's just kind of funny because it is written in that kind of slightly goofier, kind of, 80s way, but it's also this bizarre topic. It's a super interesting read that I think was trying to kind of have a thing for the times, whereas nothing I think is morally questionable now. The way it's going about this sexuality moral dilemma is just handled in a way that's clearly of a yesteryear sort of deal. It's just, you gotta check it out. Then the next issue I wanted to mention was kind of in light of who started this all, who's Howler Mouse, and I know his deep, deep love for Booster Gold. So I wanted to, kind of, maybe if you're on that run, check out 594, the very next issue, in which Booster Gold basically just kicks the crap out of Superman. That is basically the issue, and it is just a sight to behold. It's a bit more about the spectacle, but it's just rendered and done in such a way that you just believe it. You feel it to be right. And so that's the next one. It's just a fun issue. I don't know. Just stuck out though. Also, clearly, Byrne is very noted for doing a lot of work with Chris Claremont and all that, and a lot of us have talked about that before. In fact, there was that Dark Phoenix Saga community project that we did. I'm going to put a link to that below, and you can kind of see us talk about that, but I feel like that era is really going to be mined in a lot of these videos. So I wanted to kind of talk about something that I have a little more connection with, that I actually think is a little more interesting as far as Byrne's legacy in the comics world. So, I wanted to talk about Spider-Man Chapter 1, but more kind of the era and implications of Spider-Man Chapter 1, that Byrne was just... that was him and his take on Spider-Man. This came out at a time when they were relaunching The Amazing Spider-Man, and this was ages ago. This was a big deal. They were going to renumber Amazing Spider-Man starting with 1. The outrage, the contempt, it was a big deal. And they were doing it because they were kind of rebooting Spider-Man, but in a lighter way, not the way we have like a New 52 or something, or just doing Spider-Man, kind of in the way they had done Superman with the miniseries and renumbered and kind of carried forward. But Action Comics continued, so maybe not 100%, but you get the idea. And so who do you call him to do that? Byrne. And so Amazing Spider-Man ends on a weird number. And it relaunches in the face of this. Now, we all know Amazing Fantasy 15's story, and this doesn't stray too far. The wording's a little different, maybe a little more relevant for a 98 comic. I actually bought this comic because I couldn't find a reprinting of Amazing Fantasy 15, and I kind of wanted to check this out. So it doesn't stray too far. Some fashions of people in the background are probably more modern than like the 60s. We get a little more character development with Ben and May, and just I feel like the biggest change from this issue between Amazing Fantasy 15 is there's just more pages to play with, so they dig in a little deeper. But the other big change is there's kind of a character in the background tied to the spider bite. Dr. Octopus is working in the lab, and in order to deal with the radiation and whatnot, he has his mechanical arms that he's operating differently, kind of a la what they ended up doing in the Spider-Man 2 movie. And so there's a lot of elements and a lot of work to try to make the Spider-Man universe smaller and more hinged on kind of these key first-year moments, which is funny because the first chunk of Amazing Spider-Man comics basically introduces the majority of the ongoing rogues of Spider-Man. There's a few hitches, Robot at high school, whatever, didn't quite make it, but you see it back later, a la Dan Slott with the Superior Spider-Man. I'm diving off. What's really interesting about this, though, is this Chapter 1 does a lot to try to reboot Spider-Man, make it relevant, make it easier for people to dig in at a time where it was just for the comics, for that need. And this didn't go over as well as hoped. It was just 2 years later that the Ultimate Spider-Man started up. Because this was 98, and then in 2000, Ultimate. And what's interesting is some of the elements introduced in Chapter 1 obviously fall by the wayside, especially the main villain that they try to add to the canon that played a part in The Amazing Spider-Man with the relaunch later, that Byrne was drawing, but it was Mackie writing, which is funny because Byrne did, for this 12-issue mini, Byrne did the whole thing. But Ultimate brings, kind of Dr. Octopus closer and kind of keeps that smaller, more tight-knit community kind of in the way this introduces in an odd way. And so when we see reboots and how that happens, this isn't necessarily what people think of first, but it did have an influence on a lot of the ways that we do understand Spider-Man, even though kind of the broader strokes are not used. So for me, this is the biggest influence Byrne's had on my comic reading career, mostly because I'm a bigger Spider-Man fan than I ever have been of Superman or anything. So there you go. Hope you like the links, and please, if you want to know more about this creator, check out the other videos going around. Howler Mouse is putting together a playlist of all the videos. I've watched a great many of them, and a lot of people know a whole heck of a lot more than me. And I think you do yourself well to go in, and if not even just for this creator, to hear about maybe some more minutia of a different era that's not the big ones, you know, going beyond the Dark Phoenix, going beyond the Superman reboot, but hearing about more of the issues of the time and not the what would have been the big events or what have you. So there you go, and I hope to catch you all soon with another comic review.